Now, I've got the alumni over there, and this is the challenge to you, alumni. This is my class, 2019. And my family is making a grant to eliminate their student loans.
That was Robert F. Smith, the Chief Executive Officer, Chairman and Founder of Vista Equity Partners, who made headlines when he pledged to clear the entire student debt burden of Morehouse College class of 2019. I'm very pleased to say that he joins us now. What an extraordinary thing to do.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. It's exciting to be a part of, for sure.
I mean, are many people going to follow suit in doing more, actually looking at a tax system that means that education is either free or more affordable in the United States?
Well, what's exciting is just the outreach that I know that has come from various philanthropists and folks saying, okay, what can we do? What are effective ways to actually be helpful here? You know, a number of people are actually looking at and saying, how do we create a more inclusive economy and more inclusive, which is part of the whole theme here, inclusive capitalism, which is a great system in which to operate. And we're actually working on a really interesting project now, and I've got a guy by the name of Fred Goldberg, who's actually a former commissioner of the IRS, working on a program where we may be able to, with the Fund 2 Foundation, create completely free education for STEM students for HBCUs. So we're hopeful able to announce that sometime in the next 12 months or so. The urgency is here and it's now, but the efficiency of it is one of the key elements of how we're going to get this done.
Okay, but how should governments also deal with this? What are the recommendations that you would give to the presidential candidates?
Yeah, like all things, they need to think about it holistically, and it isn't just, oh, redistribution of wealth. It's really redistribution of opportunity. Our global economy truly is one that's being enabled by technology, and we have to, you know, skill our people, at least the U.S. government, skill our people to participate. You know, we have now distributed computing power globally, and as a result of that, you now have centers of excellence in different parts of the world that are leveraging their people, their greatest asset, and training them to participate in the next generation economy. We call it this fourth industrial revolution, and part of each of the governments in the U.S. in particular has to think about how do we skill our people best and create opportunities for them. That's how I have to think about it, and education is a fundamental basis for ensuring that that happens.
Why have we not fixed this in 2020? What's happened?
Not sure. There are elements where I see corporate leaders, which is one of the advantages of being here in Davos, and I have a chance to spend time with now what are becoming friends with large corporations, and they're focusing on how do we reskill the workforce, how do we train people, how do we get people to, you know, young people engaged in the process of productive activities, leveraging technology, and also thinking about it holistically. How do we do it in a way that we are not impacting the environment negatively, but actually creating impacts that are positive to the environment? But you have to meet and you have to convene in order for that to happen.
The concern is that all these, you know, the way of looking at it holistically is actually very difficult, right? How do you measure these?
Yeah, it is difficult, but the good news is when you get smart people who are motivated to make a change, you can actually make some things happen. If you don't meet, it won't happen. If you don't get together, if you don't convene, if you don't talk about it, if you don't make plans, it surely won't happen. And people then kind of retreat into their own world, and I think that leads to a lot of what we're seeing, this whole nationalism, which I think is a bad thing ultimately for all of us globally.
But do you think there's a real change, a real concrete change, so people don't just, you know, talk about inclusive capitalism, but actually do something about it?
We see it every day. I look at today, even our own portfolio companies at Vista, we now increase, the number of people in our companies by over 20% by the time we buy a company and the time we end up selling it. Our diversity has increased. We're now over 40% are women, not only in our senior ranks, but throughout rank and file. African Americans, about 30%. So our whole dynamic of what we're doing is saying, let's be holistic about the approach and change and do it by example. Right. And if you do it by example, then you can then scale.
But that's at Vista. What about the rest of the industry?
Well, we see it. You know, and like all things, you know, as you have the conversations, you hear people like Larry Fink even out there saying, now I'm going to start to force ESG initiatives. As you may or may not know, I've been chairman of RFK Human Rights, and 8 years ago is when we started our first ESG initiatives called the Compass Conference. All that was designed to how do we get corporate leaders, shareholders to think about ESG as a forefront of what they do in the way they think about investing and actually create sustainable returns, not just one-time returns.
But is the only way to make this better the way, you know, forcing companies to actually disclose some of these things?
Well, of course you have to disclose. I mean, I think the big part is actually educate, understand, and actually I call it do the math and really look at the impact. One of the things we're doing again at Vista in that context, we said, okay, what is our carbon footprint? And so what we figured out is within our companies, all our air travel, we're in a relatively clean industry, software,
right.
enterprise software, air travel and power. And so we've now figured out with just our own firm, we're now making, and we'll announce this over the next week or so, and finalize an agreement where we're buying about 650,000 tons of carbon credit. But the point is, the way to do it is do the math, figure out the activities, and find the projects. This is a project that we're doing in Kenya and is actually preservation of land for that purpose.
You're doing it. So many other people aren't. Why not force companies to disclose that kind of stuff?
Like all things, I leave that to the politicians. All we can do is control the things we can, lead by example, and meet with other people and talk about the benefits. One of the greatest benefits, I think, is because we take this stance and we lead by example, make profitable companies take that profit basically and turn it into holistic approaches to addressing community issues. What we're able to do is attract more talented people, because this next generation is not thinking about it just in terms of profit motive. They're thinking about, I want to work for a place that has a heart, it has a soul, it has a type of vision about who we are and what sort of world we want to live in. And I think leading by example is the better way to do it. You can preach to the politicians all day, and I hope that they listen, but part of what we do is just lead by example and show the results.
Okay, why do you think there's a shift overall in business? Is it because it just makes business sense? Is it because they're worried about populism, or is it something else?
I think there is a necessity that has come from the fact that our climate is changing on that side. It truly is. And now I think that when you talk about transparency, the revelation, the data actually shows that. That sort of activity, you'd be a fool not to do something about it, kind of point number one. Point number two, you now have to think about, how do I compete in a marketplace as a company or as a government that is ever expanding? Well, you have to do it in a way that's sustainable. Otherwise, it will, unsustainable products and companies will not last. So all of that, I think the information that you all provide and that everyone has access to, because we have this global media world and internet, has gotten people aware, and they talk about it and say, we're going to do something about it in little groups and then in larger constructs. So part of what we have to do as industry leaders in places like Davos and others is actually talk about what are sustainable solutions at scale. And that's really what I come here to do, is figure out how can we actually A, inspire, B, connect, and C, put action in place and actually get contracts in place and actually move things forward so that works profitably for us and for all the communities we're focused on.
Robert Smith, thank you so much.